The last contract. Location, Verith Station, outer ring of the Kelvary cluster year, 2387 Galactic Standard. Jaraketh Vel had killed 43 sentient species. He had hunted Thorinid warlords across the methane seas of Iduan Prime. He had tracked crystalline hive minds through the frozen nebulae of the Quellan expanse. He had cornered the infamous pirate Queen Dressea Merul inside a collapsing dwarf star and walked out carrying her beacon as proof of contract completion. For 119 years, his name had moved through the galaxy like a cold wind, felt before it arrived, understood only in the silence it left behind. The Verith station reeked of recycled oxygen and desperation. It floated at the edge of the Kelvary cluster like a broken tooth, tilted slightly on its axis after a micrometeor strike 3 decades ago that no one had ever bothered to correct. Kelvary merchants called it the Lean. Bounty hunters called it home. Jaraketh did not call it anything. He simply arrived, as he always arrived, unannounced, his massive 7-foot frame wrapped in thermal compression armor that absorbed ambient light and made him appear as a shadow given weight and purpose. His species, the Vrakna, were among the oldest apex predators in the known galaxy. 4 arms, each capable of independent combat coordination. Eyes that perceived 16 spectrums of light simultaneously. A cardiovascular system so redundant that he had once fought for 11 hours with 2 of his 4 hearts ruptured. He took a seat at the contract terminal in the back of Mirren's Exchange, a bar that smelled of Kelthian spice broth and old regrets, and opened the encrypted file that had been waiting for him for 6 days. The file had no sender name. That alone told him something. The contract was simple on its surface. Locate and eliminate 1 human male named Caius Wren, age 34, former specialist in the United Earth Defense Corps, last known position in the Aldros Reach, a lawless stretch of space 3 systems beyond where galactic law pretended to care. The offered payment was 400 million galactic credits. Enough to retire on. Enough to buy a small moon. Jaraketh read the file 3 times. He had taken contracts on humans before. Twice, in fact. Both times had ended in completion, but both times had left something in the back of his mind that he could not name, a residue, like the echo of a sound that should not have been possible. Humans were young. Absurdly, almost offensively young as a species. They had achieved faster-than-light travel a mere 400 years ago, which by galactic standards made them newborns who had somehow wandered into a combat arena and started winning. They were soft. They lacked natural armor, natural weaponry, natural resilience in the traditional sense. They had an average lifespan of barely a century. Their homeworld had a single moon, a single star, no particular advantage of geography or radiation that should have accelerated evolution in any meaningful direction. And yet, Jaraketh pulled up the secondary file attached to the contract, the one marked Known Engagements. He scrolled through it slowly. Caius Wren had survived contact with a Vrakna hunter once before. 3 years ago, another contractor had taken a job on Wren for a much smaller sum. The hunter, a mid-tier Vrakna named Goreth Seeing, had tracked Wren to a derelict mining station on the edge of the Aldros Reach. Goreth Seeing had not come back. What had come back was a data package, automatically transmitted from Seeing's suit upon catastrophic biosign failure, containing 47 seconds of footage. Jaraketh watched it now, in the dim light of Mirren's Exchange, with his thermal drink cooling untouched beside him. 47 seconds. Goreth Seeing had been a capable hunter. Not elite, but capable. He had cornered Wren in what should have been an inescapable position, a sealed corridor, gravity disabled, no exit vectors. The footage showed Seeing's targeting system confidently locking. It showed the moment Wren, instead of attempting to flee, had gone completely still. And then things had happened very quickly in ways that the targeting system could not fully parse. When the footage ended, Goreth Seeing's biosigns flatlined. Wren was not visible in the final frame. He had simply ceased to be where he was. Jaraketh closed the file. He looked at the ceiling of Mirren's Exchange, where a Kelthian fan coral decoration rotated slowly in the recycled air current. He thought about the 400 million credits. He thought about his 119 years of successful contracts. He thought about the 47 seconds. He accepted the contract. He did not do it for the money, though he would not have admitted that to anyone. He did it because 47 seconds had planted something in his chest that felt disturbingly like curiosity, and Jaraketh Vel had not felt genuinely curious about prey in 30 years. He began his preparations that evening. He requisitioned updated intelligence on the Aldros Reach. He calibrated his sensor suite to human biosignatures specifically, their unique mix of carbon, nitrogen, and the particular electrochemical pattern of a human nervous system under stress. He reviewed everything known about Caius Wren, military record, psychological profile, known associates, movement patterns. The psychological profile gave him pause. Most prey, when hunted, moved through predictable emotional stages: denial, panic, evasion, and, if cornered, a desperate final stand that drew heavily on adrenaline but rarely on actual tactical intelligence. Fear degraded planning. Fear made targets predictable. The psychological profile on Caius Wren noted, with clinical understatement, that the subject showed atypical stress response patterns. His cortisol levels under extreme duress were described as paradoxically low. His decision-making speed under threat had been measured by UEDC researchers and found to increase significantly rather than decrease when he was cornered. One evaluator had written a note in the margin of the report that had clearly been added informally, outside of official channels. It read, "This man does not get more afraid when you corner him. He gets more focused. Recommend extreme caution in any engagement scenario." Jaraketh read that note 4 times. He booked passage toward the Aldros Reach on a neutral freighter that asked no questions. As the station fell away behind him and the cold dark of space stretched ahead, he allowed himself one moment of something he rarely permitted: anticipation. Not of the kill. Of what 4 to 7 seconds had only begun to show him. The Aldros Reach was where the galaxy's cartographers gave up. Beyond the last surveyed beacon, the star maps dissolved into approximations and educated guesses. Rogue planets drifted without names. Abandoned infrastructure from 3 different collapsed civilizations created navigational hazards that updated themselves with irregular gravitational shifts. Supply lines did not exist. Emergency services did not respond. Law enforcement did not venture past the Veldris marker unless they came in force, and even then came reluctantly. It was precisely the kind of place that a man trying not to be found would choose to disappear into. Jaraketh appreciated this about Caius Wren. Poor choices of refuge were amateur mistakes. Wren had not made an amateur choice. He arrived in a scout vessel, small, fast, sensor-opaque, and began a systematic sweep of the region using detection methods that most hunters would not have thought to employ. Rather than scanning for human biosignatures directly, which any competent fugitive would anticipate and attempt to suppress, he scanned for the secondary indicators of human presence: trace carbon monoxide consistent with heat-based cooking, the specific electromagnetic signature of human-manufactured battery cells in their discharge cycle, the subtle gravitational distortion that accompanied any mass concentration of stored water. Humans, he had learned, required enormous amounts of water. It was one of their more interesting inefficiencies. He found the first trace on the 3rd day. A faint electromagnetic ghost near what his charts approximated as a debris field from a pre-collapse station designated only as OB7. The signal was almost nothing, a whisper of discharge cycling from what might have been a portable power unit. Most hunters would have dismissed it as background noise. Jaraketh adjusted course. The debris field was spectacular in the way that all ruins are spectacular, a frozen monument to something that had once been ordered and purposeful and was now chaos. Shattered hull plates, the exposed bones of superstructure, clouds of crystallized coolant that caught the light of the distant star and scattered it in cold prismatic fans. He moved slowly, passively, with no active sensors that might betray his presence. He found the first trap on the approach vector. It was subtle enough that he nearly missed it, a monofilament line strung between 2 sections of debris, attached to what appeared to be a standard emergency beacon but which, on closer examination through his passive sensors, had been gutted and rewired. If his scout vessel had crossed the filament, the rewired beacon would have transmitted a specific burst on a local frequency. Not an alarm. A notification. Patient, quiet, informational. Wren was not setting alarms to know when danger arrived. He was setting notifications. The distinction was significant. An alarm was reactive, it told you danger was here, prompting panic response. A notification was analytical, it told you a variable had changed, prompting evaluation. Wren wanted information, not emotional stimulus. He was treating his own potential death as a data point to be processed. Jaraketh moved around the filament trap with careful precision and continued inward. He found 2 more notification systems before he reached the interior of the debris field. Each was different. None were redundant, they covered different approach vectors, suggesting Wren had mapped the geometry of likely assault approaches and positioned his early warning system accordingly. The 4th detection system Jaraketh found was not a notification. It was a direct observation post. A small camera, expertly camouflaged in the scoring of a hull fragment, positioned to cover the one approach route that the 3 notification systems did not, the one that a careful hunter, having identified and avoided the other 3, would naturally choose as the safe path. Ren had anticipated that whoever came would be careful enough to find some of his traps and would adjust course accordingly. He had set the observation post not to catch careless hunters, but to catch cautious ones. Jaraketh backed out of the debris field entirely and considered. He had not been seen. He was confident of that. The camera was a passive unit and he had not crossed its line of sight. But the implications of its placement sat heavily in his mind. Ren had not only anticipated pursuit. He had anticipated skilled, adaptive pursuit. He was not defending against hunters, he was defending against good hunters. That required a different approach. Jaraketh spent 6 hours outside the debris field, completely still, running no active systems, simply observing with his natural 16-spectrum vision and letting his pattern recognition process what was in front of him. He was looking not for Ren's presence but for Ren's absence, the negative space where human activity had disturbed the natural drift of debris, where heat had left a molecular trace, where the geometry of the field showed the subtle shaping influence of someone who had been moving through it regularly. On the 5th hour, he found it. A path. Not a deliberate construction, but the accumulated microevidence of repeated passage, debris that had been nudged fractionally out of true drift by repeated contact, a patch of hull surface with the faint wear pattern of a magnetic boot contact point, the ghost of a thermal trace where a human body had rested against cold metal long enough to transfer warmth. Ren moved through this field every day, on a regular route. He was not hiding passively and waiting. He was active. Maintaining his observation posts. Checking his systems. Moving with purpose and discipline. Jaraketh found himself recalculating. He had taken contracts on humans twice before. The first had been a corrupt administrator, soft, terrified, captured in a week without meaningful resistance. The second had been a soldier who had fought with courage and ferocity but no particular surprise. Standard prey behavior elevated by training. Caius Ren was something else. He was not fighting the situation he was in. He was operating within it. He had taken a debris field in lawless space and turned it into an intelligence network. He was not surviving, he was functioning. There was an enormous difference. That evening, concealed behind a shattered section of hull 3 kilometers from Ren's apparent base of operations, Jaraketh ate a nutrient pack and reviewed what he knew. He had hunted 43 species. He had never encountered prey that made him feel like the one being evaluated. He began planning his approach with more care than he had exercised in 30 years. In his chest, that unfamiliar feeling had grown. He identified it more precisely now. It was not just curiosity. It was respect. He found that deeply inconvenient. On the 7th day, Jaraketh decided to let Ren know he was there. This was not standard procedure. Standard procedure was approach, isolate, eliminate, extract proof of contract completion, depart. Sentiment had no place in standard procedure, and neither did conversation. But Jaraketh had spent 7 days studying Caius Ren through indirect evidence and had reached a conclusion that unsettled him: a direct approach would fail. Not because Ren was faster or stronger, Jaraketh held every physical advantage of Ragnar could hold. Not because the debris field provided Ren with insurmountable defensive advantage, though it was well configured. But because Ren thought in a way that ambush tactics fundamentally could not address. The man had anticipated the approach of skilled hunters. He had built systems to detect the careful ones. Any approach Jaraketh attempted would be walking into a decision tree that Ren had already grown and pruned. The only way to exit someone else's decision tree was to introduce a variable they had not planned for. Jaraketh opened a transmission on a general local frequency, not encrypted, not targeted, just broadcast into the debris field like a voice calling into a dark room. He used trade language, the rough galactic common that served as neutral ground for species that shared no native tongue. Caius Ren. My name is Jaraketh Vel. I hold a contract against your life. I am currently positioned approximately 3 kilometers from your primary shelter. I have not approached because I believe your defensive preparation would result in mutual destruction rather than my preferred outcome of clean contract completion. I am proposing a conversation first. Silence for 4 minutes. Then, you watch the footage of Gorath seeing. The voice was calm. Unhurried. Whatever Jaraketh had expected, fear, aggression, bargaining, this was not it. The human had received the information that a professional killer was 3 kilometers away and his first observation was analytical. I did, Jaraketh replied. And you're still here. So you're either very confident or very curious. Both, perhaps. Another pause. Shorter this time. What kind of conversation? The kind where I learn what I need to learn before deciding how to proceed. That's an interesting thing for a contract killer to say. I am an interesting contract killer. A long silence. Jaraketh waited with the patience of a species that had evolved to wait motionless for days at a time in ambush. Time did not pressure him. He had learned early that the ability to wait without anxiety was one of the most significant tactical advantages a hunter could hold. There's a pressurized junction about 800 meters in on your 11 o'clock, Ren said finally. Neutral space. No traps, no observation posts within the junction itself. I'll pull them back. Come in without weapons hot and I'll do the same. If you wanted me dead and could do it cleanly, you would have tried already. I'm curious too. Jaraketh found the junction without difficulty. It was a sealed connector between two sections of the old station, still atmosphere-tight through some miracle of construction or circumstance, with emergency lighting that hummed at the low red end of the visible spectrum. Small by Vraknar standards, he had to angle his shoulders slightly, but functional. Caius Ren was already there. He was shorter than Jaraketh's frame led him to expect. Most humans were, but carried himself with an economy of posture that spoke to long practice in physical environments where wasted movement had costs. Brown skin, dark eyes, a face that had been through things and metabolized them into watchfulness rather than damage. He wore a worn tactical suit that had been repaired in at least 6 places with different materials, suggesting field maintenance under resource scarcity. At his hip was a sidearm he had not drawn. At Jaraketh's entrance, his eyes completed a full assessment sweep in approximately 1 second and then settled, not tensely but attentively. You're Vraknar, Ren said. Yes. Old species. Old hunters. He said it without particular effect, not compliment, not intimidation. Information acknowledged. Yours is young, Jaraketh replied. Extremely. A brief, genuinely amused expression crossed Ren's face. We're aware that this is a problem. They regarded each other across the small redlit junction for a moment that had a strange weight to it, two beings from opposite ends of evolutionary history, occupying the same sealed space by mutual agreement, with a contract for death between them like an uninvited guest. Why do you have a contract on you? Jaraketh asked. Ren's expression did not change in the way that a guilty person's might. It tightened in the way of someone accessing a memory that carried complicated weight. I found something I wasn't supposed to find. Inside UEDC logistics records. Resource allocation to a project-designated Pale Archive. What was Pale Archive? A program to identify human populations in contested space that were, quote, strategically non-viable, and to allow Calvary Syndicate contractors to harvest those populations for labor indenture in exchange for ceasing aggression in those sectors. Ren said it in the same flat, factual tone he might have used to describe weather. 40,000 people. Mostly agricultural colony workers. The UEDC command officers who authorized it didn't want the record to survive. Jaraketh was quiet. The people who hired you are not law enforcement, Ren continued. They're the same officers who signed the Pale Archive authorization. I'm not a criminal. I'm a witness. Witnesses can be eliminated. Yes. Ren met his gaze without flinching. That's why I'm out here instead of somewhere comfortable. Jaraketh studied him. In 119 years of contract work, he had been lied to many times. He had developed a calibrated sense for the specific micro-behavioral patterns that accompanied deception, the very slight increase in respiratory rate, the particular quality of stillness that indicated rehearsed rather than recalled speech. He observed none of them now. You knew about the first hunter they sent, Jaraketh said. Gareth seeing. Yes. I knew when he entered the Reach. He was good. He was. Ren paused. I'm sorry he's dead. That's not a line I use. I actually mean it. And this unexpected sentence, landed somewhere in Jaraketh's consciousness with the weight of something significant. In 119 years, no target had expressed regret for the death of a hunter who had come to kill them. It was not a thing that happened. Prey did not feel sorrow for the predator. Unless the prey had not thought of itself as prey. They talked for 4 hours. This was unprecedented in Jaraketh's professional history. He had spoken to targets before, brief exchanges to confirm identity before contract completion, or the occasional tactical communication in pursuit situations. He had never sat across from a contracted target in a mutual ceasefire and talked about the galaxy. Ren described the Pale Archive in detail that was either the product of extraordinary investigative work or extraordinary fabrication, and Jaraketh's assessment continued to fall heavily on the former. Names, dates, transfer documents, the specific chain of authorization that had moved 40,000 lives from the category of protected colonial citizens to strategic liabilities. The documents were stored on a hard-copy device that Ren wore on his person at all times, a data chip embedded in a sealed compartment in his left forearm. Non-electronic storage. Not accessible to remote scanning. You have one copy, Jaraketh observed. I have one copy that I carry. I have 3 copies distributed across locations I won't name, accessible to 3 individuals I won't name, with instructions to transmit to every major galactic news network simultaneously if they don't receive a specific check-in signal from me every 14 days. Ren said it without pride. Simply as engineering. It took me 8 months to set up. The people who want this buried have significant resources. I needed the architecture to be robust. You planned for your own death. I planned for the possibility. It seemed prudent. He paused. It's not a comfortable thing to design. But it was necessary. Jaraketh looked at this human, this young species mammal with his repaired suit and his calm voice and his 14-day deadman protocols, and felt something shifting in a framework that had been stable for over a century. He asked a question he had never asked a target before. Are you afraid? Ren considered it. Not performing consideration, actually considering. Yes, he said. I'm afraid of being killed before the information is secure enough to survive without me. I'm afraid that the families of those 40,000 people will never know what happened to them. I'm afraid of failing at this specific thing. He paused. I'm not particularly afraid of you. Why not? Because you haven't attacked. You've talked. That means something is happening in your evaluation of this situation that is more complex than a standard contract execution. I don't know exactly what it is, but whatever it is has bought me time, and time is what I need. He looked at Jaraketh with those dark, attentive eyes. You're reconsidering. Jaraketh said nothing. You can tell me I'm wrong, Ren said. I won't take offense. The silence in the junction was the kind that had texture to it. Jaraketh could hear his own secondary cardiovascular system, the one that handled extreme stress circulation, cycling at a slightly elevated rate. Not combat preparation. Something else. The physical correlate of a long-established internal structure being examined for the first time. Tell me about your species, Ren said, after the silence had stretched. Not the public record. What Vrakna actually think about what they do. This question so thoroughly surprised Jaraketh that he answered it before he decided whether to. We think of hunting as a form of order. We are old predators in a galaxy that frequently becomes chaotic. A clean contract, a confirmed elimination, a closed case, these have shape. They have resolution. We are drawn to resolution. And this contract doesn't feel like it has clean resolution. No. Because the shape is wrong. Ren leaned forward slightly. You're not hunting a criminal. You're hunting a witness on behalf of the criminals. That's not resolution. That's the opposite of it. It's participating in the chaos. Jaraketh was quiet for a long time. In 119 years, he said, slowly, I have never considered the moral character of a contract. I evaluated feasibility, risk, payment. I left the question of justice to others who had appointed themselves its stewards. Does that feel like the right framework now? An honest question. No manipulation in the delivery, no attempt to leverage guilt. Just a question aimed at the precise location where something had already started to crack. No, Jaraketh said. This admission cost him something. He could feel the cost of it. The weight of a century and more of professional identity shifting, a framework that had held him certain and purposeful beginning to require re-examination at its foundations. I am going to tell you something that I have not told anyone, Jaraketh said. When I watched the footage of Gorath Seeing's death, I felt something that I identified as curiosity. I accepted this contract because of curiosity. I have been rationalizing this to myself as professional interest in a challenging target. He paused. I think the truth is different. What's the truth? The truth is that I have spent 119 years being the most dangerous thing in any room I entered. And watching 4 to 7 seconds of a human in a sealed corridor, I felt something I had not felt since I was young. He looked at Ren with the full intensity of 16 spectrum vision. I felt like I was not the apex predator in this situation. And I wanted to understand why. Ren held his gaze. Then he said something that Jaraketh would carry with him for the rest of his long life. We've been told by pretty much every species we've encountered that we shouldn't exist yet. That we're too young, too fragile, too short-lived, too soft, to be doing what we're doing out here. A pause. But no one told us that. So we never stopped. The junction hummed softly with recycled air. I don't want to kill you, Jaraketh said. I know, Ren replied. What do you want to do instead? What followed was the most strategically productive week of Jaraketh's long life. He had arrived at OB7 intending to kill one human. He left that intention in the sealed junction the way one leaves behind a coat that no longer fits, acknowledging it had served its purpose and continuing without it. What replaced it was not sentiment. He was not built for sentiment in any useful quantity, but something with more structural integrity, a problem that needed solving. The problem was this: Caius Ren had evidence that would, if properly disseminated, result in criminal prosecution of 7 high-ranking UEDC command officers, freeze or recapture approximately 22 billion credits in illegally obtained Calvary Syndicate assets, and potentially allow the 40,000 survivors of the Pale Archive program, those who had not been worked to death in the indenture labor camps, to be located and repatriated. The obstacles were, one active contract on Ren's life that could be picked up by another hunter if Jaraketh withdrew, at least 4 UEDC intelligence operatives currently searching the Aldros Reach for him, and a legal framework in which Ren had no protected status because the people who controlled the relevant legal mechanisms were the ones who wanted him dead. Jaraketh pulled up a chair, improvised from cargo strapping and a section of hull plate that Ren had constructed with the resourceful pragmatism of someone accustomed to making do, and began to think. Ren watched him think. He did not interrupt or attempt to guide the process. He brought 2 cups of something he described as coffee, a human preparation of stimulant-infused hot water that smelled aggressively chemical and tasted, to Jaraketh's alien palate, like carbonized ambition, and sat quietly, working on his own calculations. The first issue was the contract. A contract held by Jaraketh Vel was a contract that no other hunter in the current market would touch: professional courtesy, and also prudent self-interest, since attempting to poach an active contract from a hunter of his reputation was one of the more reliable methods of ending one's own career abruptly. If Jaraketh remained nominally active on the contract, no competitor would interfere. He could maintain this position indefinitely, claiming ongoing pursuit, until the underlying problem was resolved. The second issue was the UEDC intelligence operatives. This was where his specific skills became more directly useful. He knew 3 of them by name. Their movement signatures were logged in the Galactic Bounty Network from previous cross-professional encounters, and the 4th he could identify from the sensor ghost he had detected on his approach to the Reach. They were good operatives. Not as good as he was. Ren had the evidence. Jaraketh had the mobility and threat detection capability to ensure Ren survived long enough to use it. We need to get your documentation to someone with the authority and motivation to act on it, Jaraketh said, on the second day of their collaboration. A single journalist or media outlet is insufficient. They can be suppressed, discredited, or simply outpaced by the resources available to your targets. You need simultaneous multivector dissemination to a distribution that cannot be controlled. That's what the Deadman Protocol was designed for, Ren said. But I need to be alive and able to do the check-in for 14 more days to confirm the backup copies are all activated and in position with their holders. If I miss a check-in, the transmission goes out immediately, but 2 of the 3 holders don't yet have their full packages. I was still routing encrypted segments to them when the operatives got too close and I had to go dark. So you need 14 days of survival and communication access. Correct. The operatives will close within 4 days at current movement rate. Also correct. Ren looked at him steadily. This is the part where I've been in trouble. It was also, Jaraketh recognized, the part where a century of professional hunting expertise could be applied to a purpose that felt, for the first time, architecturally correct. He was not being asked to eliminate a problem. He was being asked to protect a solution. He spent the next 12 hours restructuring the defensive geometry of the debris field with Ren's guidance on the existing systems and his own judgment on what was missing. Where Ren had built a network optimized for early warning and evasion, the defensive posture of a single individual maintaining survivability, Jaraketh added layers designed for a different strategic objective: controlled information management. He placed sensor ghosts at the approach vectors most likely to be used by the intelligence operatives, false signals that would suggest Ren had already moved on and was heading toward the Veldris marker. He reconfigured the real observation posts to provide coverage optimized for his own combat style rather than Ren's evasion style. He was not building an escape route. He was building a perimeter. On the 3rd day, the first operative reached the outer edge of the debris field. Jaraketh identified him as Veth Commander Suran Okris, formerly of the Calvary Syndicate Enforcement Division, recruited into UEDC intelligence approximately 6 years ago in an arrangement that was itself probably worth examining forensically. Okries was methodical and well-equipped and had a professional record that commanded respect. He never saw Jaraketh. The engagement lasted 40 seconds. Okries was not killed. Jaraketh had made a deliberate decision about lethal force that surprised him with its clarity, but was comprehensively neutralized, stripped of his communication equipment, and secured in a sealed section of the debris field with 3 days of emergency rations. He would be found eventually. He would be angry. He would have nothing useful to report. Wren watched the footage from the observation post with an expression Jaraketh was learning to read as a subset of calm, the specific quality of stillness that indicated he was updating a model he had held previously and finding that the update required significant revision. "You didn't kill him," he said. "No. Why not?" Jaraketh considered how to answer this. "Because killing him would have required justification to myself. He is an instrument, not an architect. The architects are your 7 UEDC command officers." He paused. "And because I am trying something different." "Different from what?" "Different from what I have always done." He turned from the display to face Wren directly. "I am 119 years old. I have eliminated 43 sentient beings under contract. Until 8 days ago, I had never questioned whether any of it had been right." He let this sit in the air between them for a moment. "Your situation presents an opportunity to do something that has a different shape than resolution through elimination." "What shape?" Jaraketh thought of the word carefully, in the trade language that sat between their native tongues. "Accountability," he said. "Resolution through accountability." Wren was quiet for a long moment. Then, quietly, "I've been out here alone for 8 months trying to stay alive long enough to make that happen." "You are no longer alone." The second operative reached the field perimeter on day 6. The third and fourth arrived together on day 9, which suggested coordination. They had identified the neutralization of Okries and adjusted their approach accordingly. Professional adaptation. Jaraketh dealt with all 3 in separate engagements across a span of 18 hours, none lethal, all conclusive. On day 13, Wren completed his check-in transmissions. All 3 Deadman protocol holders confirmed full receipt of their documentation packages. On day 14, Wren sent the activation signal. The transmission went to 112 news organizations, 7 galactic oversight bodies, 4 independent judicial observers, and the private communication addresses of every sitting member of the Galactic Assembly's Human Affairs Committee simultaneously. It went out from a small pressurized junction inside a debris field in lawless space, sent by a 34-year-old former soldier sitting next to a 119-year-old professional hunter who was currently reconsidering the entire edifice of his adult life. The transmission did not immediately change everything. That was not how large systems worked. Large systems, legal, political, institutional, had inertia proportional to their mass, and the system that Caius Wren's evidence struck was old and very heavy. There were suppression attempts in the first 72 hours. 3 of the news organizations received legal injunctions preventing publication, 2 galactic oversight bodies claimed jurisdictional complications that delayed formal response, and the UEDC issued an immediate statement characterizing the Pale Archive documents as fabricated materials produced by an individual facing serious criminal charges. The statement about criminal charges against Wren was technically accurate in that the same officers who had authorized Pale Archive had also filed charges against him for theft of classified documents. The circularity of this logic, that a witness was criminal for possessing evidence of the crime he was witnessing, was noted with considerable editorial sharpness by the 4 to 7 news organizations that could not be injuncted and published regardless. Jaraketh and Wren watched this unfold from neutral station Tavrith 4, where they had arrived 3 days after the transmission. Jaraketh had chosen Tavrith 4 for a specific reason. It operated under the oversight of the Galactic Assembly's Neutral Commerce Compact, which meant that no single political entity, including the UEDC, could enforce legal action within its jurisdiction without multibody approval. It was as close to genuinely protected ground as existed in this part of the galaxy. He had been to Tavrith 4 before. On a contract. He did not mention this. The first formal response came from the Galactic Assembly's Human Affairs Committee, whose chairperson, a Thorinid elder named Vres Coordinator Thalon, whose species Jaraketh had hunted on behalf of a now-defunct client 3 decades ago, called for an emergency session. This was significant. The Assembly moved slowly on most matters, but Thalon was a being who had survived 4 internal political purges through a combination of absolute integrity and profound patience, and when Thalon called something an emergency, other members of the Assembly tended to take the characterization at face value. The session took place 6 days after the transmission. Jaraketh watched it on a public broadcast from a corner of Tavrith 4's diplomatic lounge, eating a nutrient supplement and experiencing an emotional state he had no precise taxonomic category for. He settled on invested. Wren presented via secure transmission. He was not yet willing to be physically present in any forum that UEDC jurisdiction might reach, a caution that Jaraketh endorsed, speaking for 90 minutes with the same quality of calm factual precision he brought to everything. He laid out the Pale Archive authorization chain without commentary or emotional appeal. The documents spoke with sufficient authority on their own. 3 of the 7 UEDC command officers under accusation issued immediate denials. 2 said nothing. 2 others, in what appeared to be a coordinated decision that their legal counsel presumably arrived at through some rapid cost-benefit analysis, provided partial corroborating testimony in exchange for immunity discussions. The dominoes began to fall in the methodical way of things that have been balanced for too long. Jaraketh's role in the proceedings was, officially, non-existent. He was not a party to the case, had no standing in the Galactic Assembly, and had taken no action that required reporting to any authority that he acknowledged. His contract on Wren's life remained technically open. He had never formally withdrawn it, which continued to serve the protective function of discouraging other contractors. Unofficially, he was asked by Thalun's office to provide a sealed deposition regarding the neutralization of the 4 UEDC intelligence operatives and the conditions of their custody. He provided it. He also provided, in the same deposition, a complete accounting of the contract that had brought him to the Aldros Reach, the anonymous client, the 400 million credits, the file structure that had suggested resources available only to senior institutional actors. This information was received by Thalun's office with a particular quality of stillness that indicated it was confirming something previously suspected. The anonymous client was identified 6 weeks later as a shell entity ultimately controlled by UEDC Admiral Casaveth Morn, the most senior of the 7 officers named in the Pale Archive documents. The financial trail from Morn to the contract on Wren's life provided the evidentiary link between the original crime and the attempt to eliminate the witness, a link that transformed a potential charge of document misuse into a charge of conspiracy to cover up crimes against civilian populations. The contract on Wren was formally cancelled by the applicable Contractors Guild under the clause that voided contracts whose originating clients were under indictment for crimes to which the contract was materially connected. Jaraketh received formal notification on a standard guild update, read it once, and filed it without response. He did, however, send a private message to the Verith Station Exchange, where the contract file had first been offered, withdrawing his own registration as the active contractor. He added a note in the client-facing comments field that read, in trade language, contract voided. Subject was not prey. Recommend all future postings for this subject be rejected on professional grounds. It was the first note of its kind he had ever added to a contract file. 2 months after the transmission, the first survivor of the Pale Archive labor camps was located, a woman named Doria Fenostrev, 31 years old, found in a Kelvry Syndicate indentured labor facility on a mining asteroid in the Outer Quellan system. She was one of 4,217 survivors ultimately recovered from 17 different facilities across 6 sectors. Jaraketh read the survivor count in a news report on Tavrith 4's public network and sat very still for a long time. He had spent 119 years believing that the shape of order was elimination, that the galaxy was cleaner, more resolved, more structured when problems were removed. He had not been wrong exactly, sometimes removal was what situations required. But he had been incomplete. He had been looking at resolution as a state achieved by subtraction, and had missed entirely that it could also be achieved by accounting, by making the invisible visible, by bringing the unnamed into the light of names. 4,217 names. He thought about the 47 seconds of footage that had started all of this. A Vraknar hunter cornering a human in a sealed corridor. The human going still. Things happening quickly in ways the targeting system could not parse. He had watched that footage and felt curiosity. He had followed that curiosity into a conversation and felt respect. He had followed that respect into a partnership and felt something he still did not have a precise word for, a sense of architecture, of participating in something that had the right shape. He was 119 years old and had just learned something fundamental about the galaxy. That seemed, on balance, like a reasonable return on a contract he had declined to complete. 3 months after the transmission, Admiral Casaveth Morn made one final attempt. She was facing multiple counts of crimes against civilian populations, conspiracy to commit assassination, and institutional corruption, charges that carried, under galactic law, the kind of sentences from which there was no recovering. Her legal team had explored every procedural avenue and found most of them closed. Her political allies had distanced themselves with the practiced efficiency of people who had been distancing themselves from consequences their entire careers. What remained was the oldest tool available to people who had run out of better options: direct elimination of the evidence and the witness. Morn had resources that her indictment had not yet frozen, assets held through enough layers of corporate structure to remain technically outside the seizure orders for several more weeks. She used them to contract not one hunter but 5, simultaneously, through different broker channels. She also dispatched a UEDC strike team operating under a forged emergency authorization, which gave them the temporary legal standing to operate within assembly jurisdictional space. It was, Jaraketh thought, quite a significant response. He was somewhat gratified by it. He had anticipated this possibility. He had spent 3 months making preparations. The first preparation was professional. He had spent decades accumulating favors, the kind that senior hunters accrued through years of contract cross-referencing, professional courtesy, and the occasional decision to not take a contract that would have made another hunter's life complicated. He called in 4 of those favors simultaneously. 4 hunters of varying species and specializations who owed him enough that they answered when he described the situation and asked for their neutrality. They agreed not to take Morn's contracts. The 5th hunter Morn had hired was someone Jaraketh knew from 2 decades ago, a Quellinid tracker named Osric Dan, capable and professional, who arrived at Tavrith 4 before Jaraketh had successfully contacted her. He found her in the diplomatic lounge. "You know what this contract is," he said, sitting down across from her. Osric was a being of admirable efficiency with words. "Witness elimination," she said. "On behalf of an indicted war criminal." "Yes." A pause. "The payment is significant." "The payment is significantly contaminated," Jaraketh replied. "Every asset Morn currently holds is under forensic audit. Payment from those assets can be traced and constitutes receipt of proceeds from institutional crime. You would complete a contract and spend the next decade in legal proceedings." Osric considered this for exactly as long as it deserved. "I'll withdraw," she said. "You owe me a favor." Agreed. The UEDC strike team was more complex. They had legal standing, however forged, and they moved with the particular confidence of people accustomed to institutional authority. 12 operatives, properly equipped, with a transport that outclassed anything Jaraketh could access on short notice. He did not try to access something on short notice. He had made this preparation 2 months earlier. Thalon's office had been provided, in the sealed deposition, with specific details about the likely form of a direct action attempt. Thalon had shared these details with the Assembly's Neutral Commerce Compact Security Division, a small, rarely deployed, but legally unambiguous force whose authority within Tavrith 4's jurisdiction was absolute. When the UEDC strike team's transport docked and their forged authorization was submitted for entry clearance, it was reviewed by people who were expecting to see it, had already verified it was forged, and had 18 armed compact security officers waiting in the arrival bay. The strike team was detained. The forgery was added to the evidentiary record in the proceedings against Morn. The 3 additional charges filed as a result contributed materially to the eventual scope of her sentence. Morn herself was taken into compact security custody 6 hours after the strike team's detention. In a secure facility she had been transferred to for her safety, a legal mechanism that actually meant for the safety of the proceedings against her, removing her ability to direct further interference. She did not take this development quietly. Her protests were documented and also added to the record. Jaraketh stood in the arrival bay while the detained strike team was processed, watching through the transparent steel panel, and felt something settle in his chest the way a structure settles when its final component is placed correctly. Not victory, exactly. Architecture. Completion of a design whose blueprint he had not understood when he accepted a contract on a human's life 3.5 months ago. Caius Wren found him there. "It's over," he said. "Morn's immediate options are exhausted," Jaraketh corrected. "The legal proceedings will take approximately 2 to 4 standard years to fully conclude. There will be other actors who attempt to interfere. The recovery of the surviving Pale Archive detainees will take longer." He paused. "It is not over. It has reached a stable configuration from which it can proceed without us holding it in place." Wren smiled, a genuine one, not the contained expressions Jaraketh had learned to parse in the debris field. "That's a very specific way to say we did it." "We did it," Jaraketh agreed. They stood together for a moment in the arrival bay of a neutral station while the practical machinery of accountability moved forward around them. "What happens to you now?" Wren asked. It was the question Jaraketh had been asking himself since the 14th day in the debris field, and he had arrived at an answer that surprised him with its clarity. I am 119 years old. I have the skills and resources of a very experienced hunter. I have, until recently, applied those resources to the service of whoever paid the most significant sum. He watched the detained strike team being processed. I think it is time to be more selective about the shape of the work. You're going to take contracts for the right clients. I am going to stop pretending that the question of who constitutes a right client is someone else's responsibility. Ren looked at him for a long moment. The galaxy's greatest hunter, he said, deciding to give a specific kind of damn. Something like that. For what it's worth, Ren said, I think that's the most dangerous version of you there is. Jaraketh considered this. 119 years of hunting, redirected. A century of expertise in finding the unfindable, reaching the unreachable, and completing what others could not, now pointed at a different category of target. Not the vulnerable, not the inconvenient, not the witnesses. The architects. The authors of the invisible crimes. The ones who wrote the names on the lists that never became public. He thought of 47 seconds of footage. A human in a sealed corridor, going still. Things happening in ways the targeting system could not parse. He thought of 4,217 names now spoken aloud in assembly chambers, printed in galactic news feeds, entered into the legal record where they would remain as long as the record stood. He thought of Gorath Seeing, who had gone into a sealed corridor on behalf of people who deserved to be in that corridor instead. Your species, Jaraketh said, is very young. We are, Ren agreed. And you came into this galaxy and began doing impossible things before anyone told you they were impossible. We didn't know better. No, Jaraketh said. You knew exactly what you were doing. You simply refused to be deterred by the difficulty. He turned from the transparasteel panel and faced Ren with the full attention of 16 spectrum vision. I have hunted 43 sentient species. I have never encountered one that treated an impossible situation as information rather than verdict. A pause. You are not what I was told you were when I accepted this contract. What were you told? Pray. And what are we? Jaraketh thought of every calculation Ren had made in that debris field. Every dead man protocol, every notification system, every 14-day check-in, every moment of calm analytical focus in a situation designed to produce panic. He thought of a species that had arrived in the galaxy 400 years ago with no armor, no natural weapons, one moon, one star, and had started winning anyway. You are the most interesting thing to happen to this galaxy in a very long time, he said. And I suspect that is only the beginning. Caius Ren smiled again. Outside the transparasteel panel, the practical machinery of justice continued its slow, necessary work. Inside the arrival bay, a Vrakna hunter who had spent 119 years as the most dangerous thing in any room made a decision about what to do with the next 119 years. The hunt had ended. Something better had taken its place.